Jeff, tell me about the TrustLab.
So Leaders Trust Lab is a safe place for leaders, people who manage teams, to come together and really explore issues of trust. The idea is to help leaders become more effective at building trust within their teams and their organizations, and quite frankly, beyond their organizations.
Yeah, and trust is one of the most important factors in leading a team. It's not just trust that the team has with the leaders, but the trust amongst the team itself. What are some of the key elements that people need to be thinking about, leaders need to be thinking about to make sure that their team trusts each other? And then as a corollary to that, what are the things that happen if they don't trust each other?
Well, let's start there, right? So, Amy Edmondson wrote a book called The Fearless Organization. She's done an enormous amount of research on this, starting in healthcare. And she finds that, for example, people are less likely to report, say, incidences, like, say, in healthcare, right? So problems, um, but also outside of healthcare, if there's low trust, right? If you don't have trust, people may not speak up, right? So you're not able to fix problems because people are, say, for example, afraid of retribution, right? That's obviously a huge problem. If you lack trust, then people misinterpret. People actually have to spend more time trying to craft an email or a message because they are so worried that the other side is going to misinterpret it. I mean, it's enormously taxing. It's expensive, right? You lose good people. It's inefficient. I mean, you name the area, and I would tell you how that is impacted negatively if there's not trust.
That's true. Yeah, losing good people is a big thing if there's an environment of lack of trust. Is there a trust but verify approach that people take where they trust somebody, but then they sort of watch to make sure, or is that just like sometimes a little bit over the top?
Yeah, it's a fair question, right? Because people say like, well, or some people are like too trusting, right? Right.
Right.
Um, and sort of like there. So I'm thinking of people in terms of personality assessments, right? Like they're like in like profiles, like so there are people that just sort of start with trust, and then there are people you have to earn their trust. Um, a lot of times the people that start with trust, if you're just like if you do something to lose that trust, like they are also like done with you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so what I would say is any business that is run, how do I put it, um, like let's say that you're working with a like a vendor, right? And the vendor says we can deliver this, right? Let's say you start without any trust, right? And or let's say the relationship's new. Clearly, in a new relationship where you haven't built trust, you're going to want to make sure before we put this money out there, right, that you can deliver, right, or make all these commitments you can deliver. Over time, think about you and I. Like over time, if you know that this person like always delivers, right? And if something came up, they will figure it out and they'll let me know early. Then I can spend a lot less time having to do that verify thing. But when you don't have trust, you're always verifying, right? And quite frankly, it often doesn't work out too well, right? So for you, if I say I'm going to do something, you can pretty much count on me that I'm going to do it.
Hmm.
Is that helpful?
That helps. Yeah, that helps. You definitely want to have people that you can rely on and some sort of comfort level that you can rely on them. There's probably more to it though, right? I mean, like, what are the other benefits that you get when you've been able to create a lot of trust in your team? And are there specific things that leaders should be looking at to make sure that they are instilling that trust amongst team members?
I mean, so I'm working with a team now, and it's actually a high performing, high performing and high culture team, right? So they like each other, right? They get along, um, and they're performing, right? Um, that's great, right? But the leader wanted to kind of, just provide more just provide improve engagement, things like that, like really just sort of make something that's already working well better. And once I started doing the work and we started to like have more open conversations, what's happened is I just got a call this last week. Like people are more willing to speak up against, like to have healthy conflict in debate, right? So better decisions are made. Like if we all like each other, that's great. And then if you say, well, I think we should do this, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know. Like I might just go with it because I want to support you, right? Because I like you and we're a good team, we're a happy team, right? So when you have more trust, you make better decisions because you have healthy conflict. In the same way, if you lack trust, the opposite could happen. Like you say something and I'm just constantly going against you, right? Because I'm trying to look better than you in front of the boss, or I just think all your opinions are terrible, right? And so, like, that's just very toxic. And
Hmm.
it just leads to performance issues and all kinds of things. So, better trust is also fun, right? Like, imagine working with people where there's a lot of trust. You just don't get stuck on the like, why is this person doing this or why is this person saying this. You can just like build off of each other's energy and comments and actions.
Hmm. What can leaders do to instill that feeling of camaraderie and trust? Is it things like retreats, maybe structured retreats where you have an outside person come in and do it as opposed to having the leader run the retreat? What are some of the options that leaders have?
Yeah, so retreats are a great way to start for sure, particularly ones that are focused around people getting to know each other better, right? Like, so for example, I've been running these retreats with this particular team, and we did a particular assessment, like a communication, we'll call it assessment. And we looked at like, oh, here's a good way to communicate with me, and this is not a good way to communicate with me. And everyone went around, and as they shared, this is what works for me and what doesn't, they also shared, and here's where that didn't work, right? Something that had happened, right? And here's when it did work, right? Like, so, like Sally was, you know, great in this, situation, right? So yes, retreats run by external facilitators, sometimes by the internal leader, are great. Um, but other things like talking about the process, right? So like a leader can just say like, pause, like, how are we doing? What's working right now? What's not working right now? I noticed that we seem to be sort of stuck. I noticed that, um, you know, Jim, like you keep interrupting, Sally. Like, what's that about, right? So being able to just call it out, like we all know it, right? Imagine when you've been in a meeting and something's happened and you're thinking like, "Oh, that was weird," right? But then everybody just kind of keeps talking over it. You just keep ignoring it. Everybody knows what just happened was weird, right? But when you don't call it out, that erodes trust. When you call it out, you actually get to figure out, well, what's that about? Like, why did that just happen? What's going on, right? Because that's the road towards improving performance and improving culture.
As you said that, I'm reminded of Patrick Lencioni's book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And
Yes,
he had quite a few different scenarios in which something like that happened. And you see how the characters deal with it in certain different ways.
yes.
So, all very important information. Jeff, what else do people need to know? What else do leaders need to know about the Leaders Trust Lab and about your work there?
So it's, with my colleague Steve Bauer, him and I have been putting this together again based on, decades of research and work. Um, I mean, we're excited about it. I mean, if they, give information, if they want to like explore into it. Um, the idea is that we're looking for leaders who are willing to come in and be open and a little vulnerable, right? Sort of, talking about kind of their own experiences and things like that, because, it's the container of the leaders within that's going to actually create the greatest value, right? Having a safe place to be able to, basically have conversations that you can't have with direct reports, you can have with your manager, and you quite frankly can't really have with your peers, right? You can have to some extent, but sometimes peers become direct reports, or peers become, managers, or, whatever. So anyway, so I know, I'm just excited about it. It's an experiment, right, for all of us, right? Like, let's have a lab around trust, and like, let's see where that, takes us. I think it's pretty exciting, and I think it's very timely to what's needed right now in business.
Very good. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so the
Jeff, tell me something. Many leaders step into a new situation, new job, new role. What are the first things they need to do?
co-create the working alliance, period. So what happens, here's what happens when you don't have an open dialogue around expectations and communication. What happens is you make it up. So the leader makes it up, the team member makes it up, and you keep making it up. And they're trying to please you, you're trying to like make that working relationship work out well. You're gonna both mess up. Sometimes mess ups actually can have long-term negative impact. But even more so, you end up falling into patterns that don't really quite work, but you don't really call it out because it's not that big a deal. And then it gets weird if 6 months from now you're like, by the way, I really hate when you do this. I really hate you using all caps.
Yeah, then it's really manifested itself much deeper, and it's a lot harder to resolve.
1,000%. So what I do, this tool that I created over the years, actually, it started because in 2010, I had the dean of the business school that I got my MBA. He was telling me at like a networking sort of social event that he was hiring his third admin. Like, they keep failing, right? And that relationship.
Like Murphy Brown from the old 80s or 90s show. I can't remember when it was on.
Yeah. So I went home and I sort of said, well, here's some questions, right, that you might want to have a conversation with. And then over the years, it's become like refined, and now it's sort of a self-existing tool that's I give out the most. But the idea is, like, you ask each other questions to explore issues around communication expectation. Like, how do I hold you accountable? How do you want me to recognize you? If I'm your direct report, how do I know, this, by the way, this is what works for me in terms of I need feedback. I don't need pats on the back all the time, but I need feedback. Just say, yeah, this is going in the right direction. Or like, please, if I'm not doing something, don't just give me a pass because I'll keep doing it. And, and that's going to be a problem. One of the questions out of about, 50 questions there is, when you think of a manager that you reported to in the past that worked really well, what was it about that relationship, and what did that manager do that made it work really well? And then, of course, when you think of a relationship that didn't work so well, why not? And then they would ask you a similar question, right? So when you think of people that have reported to you and that relationship just worked so well, why? What is it that direct report did and didn't do, and how they communicated that was so effective for you? And then the opposite. When you think of a report that didn't work out so well, why not? And then how can I avoid that? Right? And I'll give you one other simple example. How do you give feedback? Like, both ways, right? So you say something that doesn't land too well with me, you're my new boss. Like, you know, it's going to be really weird and uncomfortable. We haven't even built trust yet for me to say, geez, Raj, I don't like when you do that, right? That would be really weird. But if you just said 3 weeks ago, listen, I really want you to give me feedback. And here's, by the way, what works for me. Don't do this. Don't give me feedback this way, like in front of my boss. And, but like, but like this way, because I really want to form the right patterns with you that's going to be most effective, right? Like, oh my God, like it's so much easier to give you that feedback. And then obviously the reverse. Like, if I report to you, like, you're going to need to give me feedback all the time. Some people take feedback really well, and some people don't at all, right? They think that you're, I don't know, attacking them as a person.
Attacking them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, we just, set it up. Like, maybe I say, okay, Raj, well, don't give me feedback in real time because like that'll mess me up. Can we just set 5 minutes, or one-on-ones and just for feedback time, like whatever structures you come up with. And then I say, after you come up with these set of agreements about expectations and how to communicate with each other, literally get out your calendars and put a date 3 months from that day to have a follow-up conversation. Here's what we agreed. How are we doing with our communication?
That's a good point. Is that to not just have this conversation once, but have something to reinforce so that you're still on the same page. Because the first time you have the conversation, you haven't built the trust. After a little bit of time, um, you've got data points to validate that you're
Yes.
trying to build trust, and then you just sort of reconnect to just say, are we still on the same page? If not, let's like make some fine tuning adjustments, things like that, right?
Yeah. The
Yeah.
trial and error method of forming an effective reporting relationship is way outdated, and it, quite frankly, excuse my language, sucks, right? Like, because it's embedded in the name, trial and error.
Mm.
It's got errors. You're going to make errors. Why should you have to make those errors? Because some of them are hard to repair. And even so, even when you don't make errors, such that they need to be called out, you form patterns. And then, right, and then you just keep reinforcing patterns that actually neither one of you, I mean, imagine a situation where neither one of you actually like something that you're both doing, but because nobody said anything, the other one thinks that you like it.
Yeah. And one of the things I do just as an add-on to this initial framework that you build is when I do one-on-one meetings, I have a very formatted structure and I call it the top five. So we talk about the top five things that you were supposed to work on last week that we'd agreed to, what the status is of those, and then the top five things you'll work on this coming week. And then there's yellow flags and red flags. And so as a leader, one of the big things, big roles you play is to be the remover of obstacles to progress. And so if there's something that's blocking progress, that's I would consider a red flag issue that I could take across teams. If there's some other team members, not on your team, but maybe cross teams that need some additional information to remove the blockers, those things I find tend to help. So having that effective communication up front so that you can have these meetings very productively, I think is a real critical thing.
Well,
So
exactly. And by the way, like, that's something that if I was new reporting to you, I would want to know. Like, by the way, one of the things that works for me is to have these, 5-5 meetings, red flag, yellow flag. And then maybe even coming to that meeting is like, you learn that maybe you're both a texter or email something, and maybe you actually have text or emails that say, yellow flag, red flag, right? And so, you say, by the way, my inbox gets filled really quickly. So when something I need to be alerted to something, not in the moment, but really soon, let's title that yellow flag. And if it's like urgent, let's title that red flag, right?
yeah,
So we're not waiting for the next, for the end of the week or whatever. So,
yeah.
right. So those are the kinds of, right, discoveries. Like, you actually may even refine your tools that already work for you just by having a dialogue with someone who what works for them might be different, right? So you both are trying to adjust to each other's preferred styles to create the best working relationship.
Jeff, thank you very much. I know this conversation will be very useful for new leaders as well as very experienced leaders as they step into new roles, or also as they get new employees who also need to have this conversation so that they're managed to the best of their ability. So, very good conversation. Thanks.
Yep, thank you.